I wanted to film a little video tutorial on how to do ladder back jacquard for my new pattern, the DEGEN dot sock. Here they are. Ladder back jacquard allows you to do what looks like intarsia in the round, but it is not intarsia, it is instead a jacquard, and I'll show you what it looks like. One disclaimer though, this was the sample, and so I did make one pretty major change since I knit the sample to the pattern, which I'll tell you about in a second. But this is what ladder back jacquard looks like on the inside. You're basically creating this sort of secondary fabric, which serves as a scaffolding. And the second color that you are not using on the face, so here is the main, but on the inside, the contrast is more apparent. The second color that you're not using is ladder backing on the inside. So for example, here's the dot on the inside, but of course it is the red on the outside. The one big change that I made that I want to call out right here is that on dark colorways, we found out in the test, the ladder back jacquard was totally okay just in the zone where the dot is. So on this sample, the ladder back is just here. But on light colors, we realized that it puckers a little bit. So instead, in the final pattern, the jacquard goes from the cuff to the heel, and that sort of avoids that issue. So with that, let's learn how to ladder back jacquard. At this point in the pattern, you've knit the cuff, you've put a marker at the beginning of your round, which is important because when you knit the dot, it'll be centered on the center back, so right above the marker. And then you will have knit one stockinette round in your main color. So for me, this oatmeal-y color will be my main color, and then I want the dot to be blue. So let's bring in the chart. This chart is not exactly the same as your chart. I just sort of crunched it down and eliminated some rows just so that there's less to look at. But we will need to start with this row that's right above this ruler. And you'll see that there are, just ignore the size, but the pattern is 4 background color and then 1 dark color, which for me will be the blue, with this symbol. This symbol means that you're going to make 1 into the stitch below, which I'll show you how to do. And then knit 4 normal with your ground color, main color, then pick up and knit 1 in the stitch below. So let's look at how to do that. So again, I have already knit 1 round in my ground color. And the very first thing I'm going to do is knit into the stitch below with my contrast color. So I'm just going to get a little bit closer. You can see that I'm not knitting into this oatmeal-y stitch. I am coming into that stitch below it, trying to only grab just a little bit of it. And then I'm going to knit into it with my contrast yarn. Again, it's important here that when you knit into that stitch below, you are not removing your main yarn. You are just knitting into that stitch and your main yarn loop is still on there. So then with the main color yarn, just gonna give myself a little slack. With the main color yarn, you're then going to knit 4. And you wanna do this part at your normal tension with your background color, not too loose, not too tight, just sort of what you were doing. Then, so that's my 4. Then next, same thing that I did with the first stitch. I'm gonna pick up the stitch below and I'm going to grab my contrast yarn and knit it. And in this case, I do want to knit it quite loose because the goal is very similar to stranded knitting. This first round looks stranded. You'll have a float with the contrast color going across the back, and then you'll drop it and knit 4 with your main color in your normal tension. So keep the normal tension for your main color, and then when you go to pick up and knit into the stitch below with your contrast color, that's where you're nice and loose. 4 main, then knit into the stitch below with the contrast, nice and loose. 4 main. If you're a person who feels comfy doing stranded knitting, holding the yarn in both hands so that it kind of looks like this, this is the perfect time to go for it and use that technique because you will be knitting with both colors. I'm not great at it, as you can see, so I'm not going to do this, but if you're good at it, go for it. Okay, so that's my 4. Moving right around. I'm now on the blue contrast stitch. So going into the stitch below again. And I am now just going to work my way around. Okay, I'm now back at the beginning. I just did my setup row and I'm just showing you the inside. So here it sort of just looks like normal stranded color work where you have one floating behind as the other is knitting. But as we know, what we just did is we picked up a stitch that wasn't previously there by knitting into the stitch below. Now we're going to just do the standard ladder back procedure. I will show you how to do ladder back. And that's where this chart is abbreviated. I cut out all of these setup rows because essentially you just need to know that it's 4 ground and then 1 contrast. So 4 ground, 1 contrast. The key to this is that whenever you're doing the stitches that make up the fabric on the inside, you want your main color to first come to the front. So I'm starting with my main color in between the needles to the front as I knit my first stitch, which is contrast. And again, nice and loose on that. And then I move that main yarn to the back to knit my main color. And you do not need to be loose on your main color. So main color's knitting kind of normal. Here we are again where I'm at the blue. So I'm going to bring the yarn to the front, knit that blue stitch nice and loose, bring the yarn to the back, and knit the main yarn as I normally would. Yarn to the front, knit blue, loosely, yarn to the back, carry on in main color. We will do that 2 more times so we get to the end of this needle. Yarn to the front, knit the blue loosely, yarn to the back, and carry on with your main color. You will repeat doing this for 10 rows And that 10 rows is the number of rows in the chart before you actually get to the dot. So this section, we're not even knitting the dot, we're just sort of setting up that ladder back jacquard so that when we get to the dot section, we are good and ready to go and the ladder back is already set up. If you do not do all of these ladder back rows before you do the dot, that's actually how I knit the sample. And on some yarns, it'll leave like a little dimple where you started the ladder back. So instead of doing that, we're just starting the ladder back at the cuff so that you don't even notice the dimple because it's basically just at the cuff. We are now back at the beginning, and I just wanted to show you what the inside looks like. So you essentially have the beginning of a sort of loose scaffolding of fabric that will be building up on the inside of the sock, but it's hard to see because I've only just started, but you can definitely tell that you can't see the blue through to the outside. It's just working its way around the middle. So it's sort of like you're knitting a separate fabric on the inside from the outside. That'll change a little bit when we start the dot, but since we're just knitting the main color on the outside and contrast on the inside, for now you just have the two yarns sort of working independently, one on the outside and one on the inside. So I'm going to keep doing my 10 setup rounds before the dot, and then I'll come back and do the dot with you. So I've gone ahead and knit my 10 setup rows before the dot part goes into effect. One thing to notice is that in the pattern, you want to stop this round 4 stitches before the center back marker. So if I know the center back happens between these two double pointed needles, I'm going to stop 4 stitches before. And the reason for that is that when we look at our chart here, this is the center back. So there are 4 stitches before the marker and 4 after. These verticals that you're seeing within the dot, again, represent stitches from the ladder back jacquard that are going to be not seen on the front, but will be part of the ladder back. So I'm 4 stitches before the center back, and I am just going to simply now knit them in my contrast color. So I have 4 of the contrast color here, and I'm going to knit those in the contrast color. Because this is now the main color I'm using, the color of the ladder back switches. So I've now knit 4 of the contrast, and I'm going to knit 4 more of the contrast. So this is now the color that I'm going to bring to the front. And this previously contrast color stitch is now going to become main color for the ladder back. And again, keep it loose because you want all of the ladder back stitches to be quite loose. Then I'm going to bring that contrast color to the front and knit 4 more. The next stitch I have here that's ladder back is again main color. So I'm going to bring the color that I am using, the contrast color, to the front. I'm going to knit that ladder back stitch in main color. Then I'm gonna bring it to the back. And my next stitches are now main color. So this is sort of where you pick up what you had been doing. We're gonna do 4 main color and then 1 contrast for the ladder back. 4 main. Don't forget to bring your yarn to the front, knit your ladder back, bring your main color to the front, and carry on. So the majority of the round will look exactly like your setup rows, except for the dot section, which is where the main action of the jacquard is happening. I am now on the final section of this round. And so this is where I want to sort of start to think about what next is happening in the dot part of the jacquard. So this is those dot stitches plus 1 ladder back stitch. It is a little easy to get confused about what is a ladder back stitch and what is a main side stitch. So just refer to your chart and remember that every 5th stitch is a ladder back jacquard stitch. So here was the first round. We're now on the second round, and I'm seeing that it sort of stair steps out 1. So what I'm going to do is this 1 main color stitch I now know is going to be contrast. So I am going to continue what I was doing until I get to that stitch. And then I am going to do basically exactly what we've been doing, but it gets a little spicier because it's the main action of the ladder back motif. All right, so I have my blue ladder back, and then I have 3 main, and then this stitch needs to be contrast. So I just drop my yarn, knit it contrast. This next stitch is a ladder back stitch. So I am going to bring my yarn to the front, knit that in the main color, which will be the ladder back, knit my 4 stitches to the back to the beginning of the round. So I'm now here. Then again, I have a ladder back. So I'm going to bring my contrast color to the front, knit the ladder back stitch loosely, bring my yarn that I'm knitting with, the contrast color, back to the back, knit 4, bring my contrast color to the back because this is a ladder back stitch, knit in the main, knit my 1 final dot stitch in the contrast, and then now the 3 before the next ladder back are main. And then I just carry on with my sort of what it was like in the setup rounds until I get back to the dot again. So just remember that as you're reading the chart, you're always going to be reading from right to left, although it is symmetrical, so it doesn't really matter. But just keep in mind that this middle stitch is the beginning of the round, so you'll be doing half of it before, half of it after, but you'll be doing it in one go, so you will sort of be spanning the previous round and then the new round to carry it through. You will not be doing the first half of the round and then the end. It will be the end of the previous round through to the next round, so that you keep it all together, and that will prevent any sort of stair stepping or jog at the bottom of your ladder back. It'll just be straight across. So I'm going to keep knitting my dot, which I am establishing at the back here, and we will meet up again when I am closing out the dot. Now for our final part of the video. As you can see, I have completed the dot, and then I went another 9 rounds to just keep going to almost where the heel is. When I first wrote this pattern for myself, I started and stopped the dot and the jacquard only where the dot was, because on this dark colorway you actually couldn't really tell. But through testing, we found that the test knitters versions, if they did it with a light color, it was a little more apparent where the jacquard starts and stops. So that's why in this version, the jacquard goes from the cuff to the heel. However, in my first version, I only started it where the dot starts. So anyway, I have now knit the dot, and I have knit 9 more rows or rounds. And the final step is this round here. And it doesn't actually matter where you start this and stop this. So you could start it at the beginning of the round, or you could start it wherever. It's really doesn't matter. You're just working to close it off. So I am actually going to knit 1 more stitch in the ladder back jacquard, just because it's hard to start a slip slip knit with the contrast color. The whole goal will be to slip slip knit the background color with the contrast color to get rid of that contrast color. So the reason that I just am opting to knit this 1 stitch final ladder back jacquard stitch is really just that, again, it's hard to start with a slip slip knit if I don't have the background color. Okay, so now I'm just gonna start making my way around. I am going to work until I have 1 final background stitch before the contrast stitch, which is shown in the chart. So I'm going to slip, slip, knit those 2 together. And because that is a left-leaning decrease, you can see that the ladder back jacquard color, the contrast color, is now sitting behind it, and that'll just basically get rid of it. It is no longer needed. So working to my next one, slip, slip, knit, slip, slip, knit. And I'm just going to do that all the way around, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. So now I have completely closed off the ladderback jacquard, and I'm just gonna make my way across this one needle just so that you can see it, because this will also be the afterthought heel setup round. I'm not going to demo that, but I do just want to show you the inside of this once I get to the end. All right, so as you can see, I guess it's a little misleading because my main color does have little sort of matching blue flecks, which really threw me off right here. Actually, this is a main color stitch, but it matches. Anyway, I've now completed that round of getting rid or closing off the ladderback jacquard. As you can see from the front, you can't see it at all. On the back, it just looks like those stitches end. You can now just make a loose tail here. Just be careful, because since the ladderback stitches are so loose, which is good, it could easily sort of flop out. So just give yourself ample tail so that when you tuck in later, it looks nice. I'm now going to just show you the original one, even though it doesn't end in the same spot as the pattern, just so you can see what it looks like. So again, the pattern version will go from here to here. With the ladderback jacquard, it'll just look more seamless, but you can see that the ladderback is sort of just this secondary fabric floating within that also makes it warmer right here. And so the upper foot will be warmer since it now goes the whole way. And that's the ladderback jacquard.